One thing I realized while watching the new Netflix series Sweet Tooth is that after seeing all of those wide open fields, the rolling hills, and just the beautiful forests, I want to move to Wyoming and get out of suburbia. 10 years after the events of the Great Crumble, a boy who is half human and half deer must learn to survive in the post-apocalyptic world with other hybrids. So the Great Crumble is what people call this viral apocalypse that the world went through. And at the same time people are getting sick and dying from an unknown virus, these hybrid babies began to be born. They are part human and part animal. So obviously this caused all kinds of confusion and then speculation that the hybrids were actually the origin of the virus. There's a hybrid deer boy named Gus, and he's sheltered and living in safety in a secluded forest home. He unexpectedly befriends a wanderer named Jeopard, and then they set out on an adventure in search of answers and Gus's origin. Gus is a bit like Buddy the Elf because he has a massive craving for sweets. He also carries around a bottle with him that is just filled with syrup, and this causes Jep to give Gus the nickname of Sweet Tooth. Jeopard is this hulking guy, and because of it, Gus calls him Big Man. The world building in this series is done really well. This is based on a DC comic, and I have zero clue about the source material. I've never read it, but that means I also can't speak to the series' accuracy. The first episode, while thrusting us into the action just a bit chaotically, it also slows way down to establish what's going on, and then more importantly, develop the character of Gus for us. The show Sweet Tooth is Gus's story, but there are also many other offshoots that are just as important to the story. With Gus, we watch his first 10 years of life as he learns all kinds of skills from his dad, who is just played spectacularly by Will Forte. He's the right amount of quirky and caring, and I literally bought every minute of his performance. Christian Convery plays Gus, and I loved this kid. He is sweet and mischievous, but he captures just that awestruck naivete of somebody who's now out in the world after being isolated for his entire life. And while the dialogue is designed to make us laugh at points because of what Gus will say, it comes across as genuine in his delivery. We're watching this innocent kid experience so many things for the very first time as he encounters different things on his adventures. And his reactions are very believable. Nonso Anozie plays Big Man, and I just loved him too. He's very gruff at the beginning, but we see that there's hidden emotion and backstory that are going to work to explain a lot of his behaviors when we get to see it. And he's a great match with Gus. They're like a weird odd couple, and the pairing of them not only brings about some good humor, but also has some very emotional moments and action too. And talking about action, this show is dark at times. So despite it looking all cutesy with these hybrid kids, there are some moments that you may not want your littles watching. All I'm gonna say is that there is a scene with some chains and a bear trap, and then another scene that involves some heat. And there's also a storyline that is pretty bleak as well. Younger audiences may not totally pick up on what's happening, but it is a prevalent theme that drives a lot of the story. And I know that what I just said is being vague, but it's meant to be so that I don't spoil it. And while these are darker moments within the show, there are also other moments that offset and balance it out so as not to leave us just all depressed the entire time. While much of the story focuses on Gus and Jeopard, there are a couple of other storylines that are going on simultaneously that do feel like they're going to converge at some point. We have a doctor and his wife, Audie and Ronnie, respectively, and they're living in suburbia in the new reality of the world. And we get to watch them live under just these almost draconian conditions. Society has crumbled and everybody is on edge and then suspicious. It's kind of like living during COVID and if you had allergies. You know, you get to play that fun game of, was that sneeze and cough because of pollen or do you have the coronavirus? And then people tackle you out of fear. We get the sense that it's not really a fun existence, but almost everyone is doing their best just to survive. There's also a storyline that follows Amy, and she's living in isolation, and while her story may not seem too important or relevant even at the beginning, it does begin to have some impact. And while the world itself may provide some conflict to the story, there's also a main antagonist that adds to that conflict. General Abbott is this pseudo-military faction leader of what's known as the Last Men. He does look a little bit like a militarized Dr. Robotnik. And the Last Men work to eradicate the world of hybrids and also appear like they're the peacekeepers of this new world order. Abbott's motivations are somewhat laid out as the story progresses, but some are certainly kept pretty vague. And I'm not sure if that's to maintain an air of mystery or to just create tension for future episodes. The scenery in this show is simply stunning too. I mean, a lot of it takes place in and around Yellowstone National Park, so there are just these wide open fields, massive mountain ranges, you have rolling hills, and then beautiful waterfalls. And watching that really did make me long to escape my suburban lifestyle. The soundtrack is also great. The song choices are fun, and there is a great mix of genres and decades. And the makeup, costume design, and set design are also done really well. Gus's antlers and ears look like they're actually part of him, and I never felt like they were either CGI or prosthetics. But there were moments in the show where some of the CGI, and whether they were backgrounds or characters, were pretty obvious, and they stood out as less than stellar. Now, luckily, this wasn't prevalent all of the time, but when it was there, it was noticeable. So like I said, I really like the world building that takes place in the series. I mean, I am fully on board with following Gus and Big Man as they go on their journey. Their interactions and adventures are really fun and tense and even emotional. And there's a complexity to the relationship as well as their journey, and it was really easy for me to be sucked into it all. I also really like the story arc of Addie and Ronnie because of how touching and emotional it is. But there's something that is just missing from the series that is preventing me from just all out loving it. I mean, don't get me wrong, I was invested the entire time in the show. I mean, I binged all 8 episodes and I couldn't get enough. But at the end of the season, I was left feeling like there was a lack of urgency, and maybe even motivations to the story as a whole. The individual pieces are good, some are better than others, and even the entire show is engaging. And I think maybe my main issue is that the season feels like it's a lot of setup without really any large payoff. And this feeling didn't ruin the show for me. I mean, in one sense, it greatly increases my anticipation for the next season. I mean, I'm in love with the characters and the world, and I even have some theories now to certain aspects and items that are shown in the season that just haven't been addressed yet. But on the other hand, I leave the first season with a bit of a letdown feeling. Like, well, that happened and I had fun, but what actually did we accomplish? So on the whole, this is a great show to check out. I mean, the characters are really enjoyable and sympathetic. Several of them even have some great development, and we get to see growth from them. The world building transports us to a near possible future, and the story conflict creates some good tension as well as excitement. It is darker in tone than I imagined, but I like how this is influenced by character motivations. And despite there being a lack of urgency to some of the events and even the direction of the show, I did really enjoy the journey. And honestly, I can't wait to see what's next for Gus and the rest of the characters. There's no sex or nudity, lots of profanity, and a bunch of violence. I give season 1 of Sweet Tooth 4.5 out of 5 couches. So are you familiar with the DC comics that this is based on? If not, if you could meet just a human-animal hybrid, what animal would you like to see paired with a human? It's kind of weird, right? I wonder what skills or traits they would have. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.